Hey, how's it going everybody? Welcome back to Aussie Fish Keeping. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 5 of the best small aquarium plants that don't grow too big and can be the perfect addition to any nano or small setup. So without any further ado, let's jump straight into today's video. So the first small aquarium plant we're going to be taking a look at is Dwarf Sagittaria. So I've talked about Dwarf Sagittaria, or more commonly known as Dwarf Sag, a lot on my channel, and Dwarf Sag is actually a super common carpeting plant in the hobby, and many beginners actually get it because of how easy it is to care for. Not only that, but it's also a super awesome low growing plant. So Dwarf Sag is actually a pretty fast spreading plant, although it doesn't really grow too tall and it only really maxes out at around a few inches high. So this makes it the perfect foreground or mid-ground plant. It does, however, bush out quite a bit, which can be super useful actually to fill in gaps between rocks and wood and any other gaps in between your scapes. But yeah, Dwarf Sagittaria is just a super awesome low growing aquarium plant. It's also super easy to maintain and look after. So that is why Dwarf Sagittaria is one of the best small aquarium plants. Moving on, the next plant we're going to take a look at is actually Cryptocoryne Parva. So Cryptocoryne Parva is actually one of my favorite crypts in the hobby, and it's an awesome little aquarium plant that doesn't really grow any taller than around 4 inches. So one of the reasons Cryptocoryne Parva is such a small aquarium plant is because it's a super slow growing crypt. So obviously being slow growing, it is quite predictable, which can make it super easy to manage and maintain. So pretty much what I mean is you're not going to trim it 1 week and then have to trim it the next week. You pretty much just have to trim it about once a month, depending on how tall you want it to grow or how big you want it to bush out. But yeah, as well as this, it actually grows in pretty uniform patterns, so you can actually quite easily predict how it's going to grow into your aquarium, which can actually be super useful if you want to do a certain scape or get a certain style going in your aquarium, and you can pretty much sort of predict where it's going to grow and how tall it's going to grow and if it's going to fill in gaps or not. But yeah, besides that, Cryptocoryne Parva is actually the smallest species in the Cryptocoryne family, and it's generally used as a carpeting plant. Although if you are trying to achieve a really nice, thick, lush and dense carpet, you would probably be looking at waiting a couple of months, if not years, to start seeing that. So this actually just proves how slow growing it can be at times, and depending on what water conditions you have it in, or depending if you have it in a CO2 tank or not, is really going to depend how fast it does actually grow. Obviously with a higher light source and CO2 in the tank, it will most likely grow faster. But as long as you're patient and stay persistent with it and maintain it well, it will eventually get that nice thick carpet you're after. But yeah, if you are looking for a nice and small aquarium plant, Cryptocoryne Parva is definitely another great option. So another great small aquarium plant for any setup is Bucephalandra. So Bucephalandra is actually quite rare in Australia in particular, and it can be quite uncommon to find and hard to get at times. I know there are a few other countries where it is pretty common, but for some reason here in Australia we don't really have it readily available, and it's never really been that way. But besides that, Bucephalandra is pretty much the same as Anubias and can be quite a good alternative in some situations. Obviously there are a few differences, the main one of course being the looks. So Bucephalandra is generally more of a purpley brown sort of blackish color, and it generally is also a little bit more metallic and iridescent in the leaves. And as well as that, Bucephalandra does better with CO2, whereas Anubias can go quite fine without it. But that definitely should not scare you away from Buce. It obviously can tolerate quite a number of water conditions, and it can do so quite well. So there is actually a wide range of different variants of Buce you can get around the world, some of which do get quite tall, some of which get nice broad leaves, but there are some that stay pretty small and can be a great plant for a small setup. So a great option for a smaller boost would be something like a Boost Brownie Ghost. So this variant in particular does actually get that nice purpley brown leaves with the really iridescent metallic on it. And of course it obviously doesn't really grow too large, which makes it the perfect plant for any shrimp or nano or small setup in general. So Boost is actually also quite a slow growing plant, and you will find, unless you have it in a really high CO2 environment, it won't grow too much and it will actually only grow a couple of leaves per month. But this is obviously a really good thing if you do want it in a smaller setup. It's actually also a pretty hardy plant, so it can be nipped at by fish and stuff and it should bounce back pretty well. It does have pretty thick leaves like Anubias, so it's pretty much just got the same build as Anubias, just a little bit different in the looks and the style of growing. But yeah, if you are looking for a small aquarium plant, Bucephalandra is another great option on top of the others on this list. So the next plant, and one of my favorite small aquarium plants, is Micro Java Fern. So Micro Java Fern or Dwarf Java Fern is another sort of rare aquarium plant in Australia. So there is actually two different types of Micro Java Fern, I guess you could say. The first being true Micro Java Fern, which stays small throughout its whole lifetime. And then the second being just smaller specimens of the regular Java Fern. So a lot of the time, true Micro Java Fern isn't actually being sold, and instead it actually is just the pups of regular Java Fern. So you do have to be quite careful when you are looking to buy Micro Java Fern. But as long as it states it's true Micro Java Fern, then you should be alright. Micro Java Fern is actually a super unique looking Java Fern species, just because it does get really nice and tiny leaves. But yeah, generally speaking, Micro Java Fern is best grown on wood or rocks, just because this Java Fern in particular doesn't really develop a large root system that can bury deep into the substrate. And most of the time, what you'll find if you do try to plant your Java Fern into the substrate is that it'll keep floating up, and that can obviously be quite annoying as it can get stuck in your filters and fish can eat it, and it's just not a fun time. So that is why I would recommend, if you are planning on getting Micro Java Fern, to stick it to wood or rocks or any other object in your aquarium that will keep it nice and hunkered down. Personally, I actually think it looks a lot better attached to wood or rocks, as it generally, after a little bit of time in your aquarium, starts to cover them and it almost begins to look like a moss, which is a super cool style to go for in your aquarium. So if you can get the true variant, Micro Java Fern is another great aquarium plant that you can get for any smaller size setup. Now, moving on to our final aquarium plant, probably the most popular on this list and probably the most common, is Anubias Petite. So Anubias Petite, or otherwise known as Dwarf Anubias, is actually one of the smallest Anubias species and is another super easy to care for and small aquarium plant. So the smallest Anubias species is actually Anubias pangolina, and the reason I didn't put it on this list is because it's actually not really readily available, and it's obviously not as common as just your regular old Anubias Petite. So another Anubias species that can actually be mixed up with Anubias Petite a lot of the time and is also quite commonly used in nano setups is Anubias nana. So the difference between the two is actually their leaf size, and Anubias Petite leaves will generally max out at about the 1 to 2 inch length, whereas Anubias nana can grow leaves of up to 5 to 8 inches in length. So obviously that is quite a large difference, and is the reason I would recommend Anubias Petite over Anubias nana in a smaller setup, just because your Anubias nana can take over and cover up a lot of the scape in your small setup, and I would just prefer smaller leaves in general. So one of the main reasons Anubias Petite actually stays at such a small size is because it's actually quite a slow growing plant. Although in saying that, it can also withstand a wide variety of water conditions and isn't prone to too many plant diseases besides Anubias rot. And obviously it can also tolerate quite a few different fish species, and it can cohabitate with most of them. As long as you don't have anything too aggressive that's just going to rip off the leaves constantly, it can withstand quite a beating by other fish. But yeah, my personal favorite on the list, Anubias Petite, is definitely the best aquarium plant you can get for a small setup, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who's looking for a super nice green, easy to care for, small aquarium plant for their tank. With that being said, that is going to bring us to the end of today's video, so I hope you all enjoyed. I really love making these videos for